ولكم ستوريز افزال فري. تودا وارتراف باكت 1859 تنكفر في ستوري في ايان بلاك كروس انو الموست unbelievable strengths ونهوز ليف هالت فور مور دوكتنس than anyone could have فركاس. وتوتنس so that they left the community shook. بتزرل توس behind her brother was some that they had spoke funny no suburbs and never برلير كورد as it should have been. This story is intense and difficult. So, take a breath, give yourself a moment, and listen closely. Before we dive in, please subscribe to the channel and drop a comment. Let me know which city and country you're tuning from. Your support helps make sure these stories are remembered, not lost. Let's get started. On the afternoon of September 18, 1859, 17 شرطة للشرطة عد سلف كرنندسي لفتد 400 شرطة باندوك نوف ترابت هوس يوزغ نسغ بتهربر هاندز. She did this in front of 12 weight witnesses. And from that very moment, her life buried into a nightmare for darker than she could have ever imagined. Because in this folder says, a black girl with superhuman strength wasn't seen as a miracle, she was seen as merchandise. This is the story of a sea. The girl that tried to break. The girl that tried to study. The girl that tried to turn into a subject for their cruel experiments. And the girl who, in the end, brought them all through and was enough for so common. To truly understand what happened to a sea, you first have to understand the world that shaped her. And that world was constructed on the furry bones of people who looked just like her. The هلرغت فمصرش كوست تمعت الكرز أفلوكن تريساس كارلين, بتسرسون ميزنان فمتشورز. It was at one of the grand plantations that later became symbols of the South. It was a working form, modest for the time, run by a family that had been the rage for 3 generations. The whole of town's crew cotton lace, kept livestock, and on 47 slave people who did all the labor. He was born on that farm on February 14 th, 1842. Her mother, a woman Mkor, did give birth to her. The labor had been long and brutal, and the midwife, enslaved woman in that base, did free so she could save them both. In the end, she could only save one. She never got to know her mother. She only knows the stories others told about her. That core had been beautiful and strong. That her son Ramfis could make come and cry. That she had left the man who fathered the sea with a fierce, forbid laugh. That man was solemn. He was sold at a plantation George when he was just 3 years old. One day, he was there, holding her in his arms and calling her his little princess. The next, he was gone, loaded onto a walk with 5 others and took a for offer. As he screamed for him until her face cafet. She didn't understand. How could she? She was 3 years old, and her father had been torn from her life like a bedirbt from a book. She never saw him again. She was raised by the community of enslaved people on the hard farm. They took true care of her, feed her, teach her the rules for surviving in a world to destroy people like them. At base, the midwife who delivered her became something of a grandmother. An older man named Hercule Peter, who worked in the stables, taught her about horses and animals. A young woman named Ruby, just a few years older than she, became her close friend and confidant. They noticed something different about Essie almost immediately. At 5 years old, she carried a full bucket of water from the well to the manhouse with a stable trass. That bucket had nearly 40 bands, chrome and streaked with those buckets. Essie carried it like it was nothing. At 8, she helped push a stack wagon out of the door of a storm. 4 men had been thrown against it, slumbering in the mire, kept nowhere. Essie put her small hands on the back of the wagon and pushed, and the wagon moved. At 12, a spot husked her in the chest so hard she flew 2 feet backward and landed in a belly. Anyone else would have had rock ribs, been landed, and turned beaded. Essie stood up, brushed herself off, and combed the horse with gentle oars and steady hands. She wasn't even bruised. Then enslaved people on the hard farm recognized what they were seeing. They had heard stories passed down through generations about people born with skills that couldn't be explained. People could see the future. People could heal the sick with etish. People have the strength for beyond what any normal body should hold. These gifts are dangerous in the world of self-free. They draw attention. They inspire fear. And fear in the hands of what people always let feel us. So they had a seize gift. They taught her to cancel it. They told her never to lift more than a normal girl could lift. Never to push harder than a normal girl could push. Never to let anyone see what she could really do. You keep it secret, and best told her, Ikanika. You hear me, child. What you caught inside you, it's a blessing and a curse. The Lord gave it you for a reason, but the white folks won't see it that way. They'll see you as something to be used, something to be studied, something to be afraid of. And when white folks get afraid of us, they kill us. She listened. She learned. She became an expert at your ordinary, at your other back, at his invisible. She worked in the field like everyone else, beckoned caught until her finger's bled, but no further rose from sunrise at sunset. She worked in the man has some teams, clean ran cook ran serve meals to the her family. She kept her raised door and her mouth shut and her strengths had. For 12 years, the strategy worked. For 12 years, she served baby in remarkable. For 12 years, no one said left the community know what she was capable of. And then came September 18, 1859. It was a third, hot and humid, weekend a flat summer day where there felt like would cut against your skin. She was working in the field that morning along said but soon as there left the bowl. The rower holster the last of the summer coat, more for those rose with black sufficiency, filler their backs with the white boys that would be processed and sold and shipped the textile mills in Nerkland and non-Nerkland. Around the a camosh broke it near the main road. A wagon had overrun a ditch, its front axle crack, its corco suddenly scattered across the muddy ground. The horse that had been bullied was trapped underneath, thrashed and screamed, its rear leg tanked the trestles. A group of white men had gathered around the accident, including Lamar William Harrert himself, the owner of the farm. They were trained to figure out how to lift the wagon that hurt the horse further. The animal was fallible, worth at least $1 and Harrert did it to close it. We need more men, one of them said. This son has to have fee. We'll have to send for help from town. That horse will be dead before help arrives, in their blade. Look at it. It's panic. It's gonna to break its own eggs if we don't get its own. She was watching from the field alone with suffer their slave workers. They had stopped Becker to see what was happened. No one expected them to help. No one asked for their assistance. They were poverty after all, not participants in the decision of white men. But she could hear the horse scream. She could see its weird eyes, its little hoof, its desperate attempts to free itself. She had grown up around horses. Nickel Peter had taught her to love them, to understand them, feel their pain as if it were her own. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that the horse would die if she did it. For a moment, she hesitated. To her fear of careful counsel. To her fear of hiding what she could do. At basis fees in her head, warned her about what would happen if the white fox found that. But the horse was dying. Right there in front of her eyes, the horse was dying. She made her choice. She walked forward, past the other slave workers, past the white man working about what to do. She walked straight up the overfilled walk, planted her feet in the mud, and bent out to grab the wood from. What the hell are you doing, Kerlouan of the white man shouted. Get away from there. She didn't respond. She took a deep breath, tightened her cube, and lifted. The walk rose. 400 bundles of wood and scattered corcoros off the ground, lifted by the ones of a 17 شرطة غير شرطة عود كرهوا ودرلي مع 20 بن themselves. She held it there, steady and sure, while the horse scrambled free from the trusses and staggered its feet. Then she set the wagon down gently and stepped back. The silence that followed was absolute. Og men stod fra oss, større at SEO suksbrøsjes that rende from desablift og tsamesr dorker, samesr that look likar ilash. William Hallergat was the first to speak. How did you do that? I asked. Has fis barely above I was sober. As he looked at his ekran. I don't know, sir. I just did. Hallergat told her slowly, like a man about shun I will anim. He serped examen her from a free knuckle, his isn't vron sotfe. How much can you left of ask? I don't know, sir. Show me. And just like that, 12 years of Heider came to end. In the years that followed, William had to put through a series of tests. He had her lift barrels of water, sacks of corn, pieces of pharmacobumine. He had her bowl a load of wacobe herself. He had her Wrestle the strongest man on the farm, a feed had an big markers, or do fermata no 50 bands. Is she on a free team? She lifted the freezer her to put in front of her. She put the waco that break and race. She bent big markers on the table less than 3 seconds. The Whitman watcher began to murmur among themselves. As he caught fragments of their conversations. Or is like freak and dim and natural. But there were other words, too. Or is like fallible and profitable an opportunity. That night, locked in her cab, as if any led herself to cry. Robbie had her way she sobbed, struck her no sober words of comfort that the boss nor lays. Maybe it'll be alright, Robbie said. Maybe they'll just put you to harder work. Maybe that's all. But the boss knew it wouldn't be alright. The boss knows that something had changed, something fundamental, something irreversible. As she had revealed herself, Anna she would be the brace. The brace came 3 weeks later, on October 1, 1859. A carriage drive that is heard from Koreans would last with man in his Hamsonas. He had silver hair, bulky eyes, and the soft hands of someone who had never the physical labor in his life. His name was Deor Silas Whitmore, a physician from Chores. But Whitmore was just any physician. He was a man with a particular obsession, someone who had dedicated his career to what he called the science of racial difference. He believed, with the fervor of religious conviction, that black people were biologically inferior to white people. He had spent his life trying to prove this belief through research, experimentation, and the systematic torture of enslaved bodies. Whitmore had heard about the through the network of concepts that connected the planter class across the South. A black girl with superhuman strength. Anomaly. A symbolism that demanded sophistication. He had come to be her. William had received Whitmore in the parlor of the Manhas. The Dan Kawasaki in talk business way let's see what it said, called it by 2 overseers told not let her out of their sea. Il que few dollars none source for her, Whitmore said. Cash to does it. Her that nearly choked on his neck. Dollars none source was an extraordinary sum, 14 zot a healthy field hand would fetch at Okish. It was more than her that had made in both his entire brief year. That's a generous offer, her said carefully. But I have to ask, was sure that much to you? Whitmore smiled. There was some code that smile. Some rapidly. I'm a man of says, a more harat. It's been my clear studying the physiological differences between the races. This can represent some I've never encountered before. A deviation from the norm. Next a bush that might prove the role? I intend to study her thoroughly. Study her. That's not your concern, amor harat. Your concern is $1 none so in your pocket by sundown. I suggest you take the money. Hallervat took the money. Essie was loaded into Whitmore's carriage that same afternoon. She wasn't kept time to could beat anyone. She wasn't kept time gather her few possessions. She was symbiotic, like a base of furniture being removed from one there. As the carriage pulled away from the only home she had ever known, Essie looked back and saw the enslaved people of her not from gathered at the edge of the road. Aunt Bess was there, her was el fastrim vos tears. Ankel beter was there, has dosat was halblisraj. Robbie was there, 100 del farewell, her masmof was or zat si couldn't hear. Essie turned away. She didn't try. She didn't bake. She just sat in the carriage, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. Whatever was coming, she would face it. She had no other choice. The journey to surest took 2 days. Otmar didn't speak to Isidore that time. He sat across from her on the carriage reading medical journals and might have not seen a leather-bound notebook. Occasionally, he would look up at her, study her with those cold cries, and then return to his reading. He treated her like a subism already, object to be examined rather than a person to be acknowledged. They derived in Charleston the fun of October 3 1859. This city was the largest annual season in South Carolina, a hub of cotton trade and South commerce. Its streets were lined with elegant houses, its harbor crowded with shops from around the world. It was a monument to the prosperity that the free had built, a cater of soda for a fandish few suffer. Whitmore's residence was a large brick mansion on Meter Street, one of the most prestigious addresses in the city. From this side, it looked like the home of a new tourist gentleman. Inside, it was somewhat entirely. Whitmore led the sea through the front door and down a long hallway, past burlers and dining rooms and libraries filled with books. They descended a flight stairs into the basement, then another flight into a sub-basement that she had non-existed. Thither grew colder as the wind deeper. There was chained from blasted brick stone. Finally, they arrived at a high wood door reinforced with their bands. Whitmore produced a key from his book and locked it. This will be your home for the foreseeable future, he said, pushing the door open. I hope you'll find it comfortable. The room beyond was a nightmare. It was large, perhaps less than 4 feet, with a high ceiling and no windows. The weather lined was shelved with drawers of preserved organs, surgical instruments, leather restraints, and the faces whose purposes she could identify. In the center of the room was a large wood table fitted with ear shackles. Along one wall was a row of fire cages, each large enough to hold a human being. The smell hit her like a physical blow. The didn't septic and some grow, some dead. I've been doing this work for 20 years, Whitmore said, walking into the room with the casual air of a mansion of a shop. I've examined hundreds of specimens. But if enough we can turn the nicer like you, a necro was far beyond what the rest should be capable of. It defies the reason I thought I know. I turned to look at her, his eyes gleam was a further that made his control. In can it find that way? In can it discover the source of your strength? And when I do, I'll publish my findings in the most prestigious medical journals in the world. This will be my legacy. This will be what I'm remembered for. As he said Nasser. There was Nasser. She was in the hand of a monster, and no words would change that. Put her in the third carriage, Whitmore said someone behind her. As he had realized there was a new one in the room, she turned and saw 2 large white men standing by the door. They were dressed like gentlemen, they were dressed like laborers, with thick arms and cool faces. They moved toward her without hesitation. As he could have fought them, she could have broken their bones like tooths. But she didn't. Not yet. She needed to understand this place. She needed to learn its secrets. She needed to wait for the right moment. So she let them lead her the carriage. She let them look her inside. She sat down on the cold stone floor and watched as Whitmore and his men left the room, the heavy door soon hunched behind them, the sound of the wreck went topless. She was alone in the darkness. Alone with the jaws of organs and the surgical instruments and the smell of death. But she wasn't broke. Not yet. Not ever. Essie made herself a promise in that moment. A promise that she would survive whatever was come. A promise that she would find a way out of this place. Broms that she would make a free cynical burst responsible for her suffer before what they had done. She didn't know how she would keep this Broms. She didn't know it or where or with what weapons. But she knew that she would keep it. She had always been strong. Now she would find it just as strong. Zik förberömt began the next morning. What more if was has assisted at sunrise. The open disease Kajan brought her to the tubulous center of the room. They strapped her door with leather restraints reinforced to surgeons. They pulled up her shirt and examined her torso with cold hands and clinical detachment. Will start with measurements, what more said, produce a set of calibers from his coat. I want exact dimension of every bone, every muscle, every work we can access without surgery. For the next 4 hours, they measure her, the length of her arms, the circumference of her thighs, the width of her shoulders, the depth of her chest. They squeezed her muscles and noted their density. They tested her reflexes with small hammers. They drew blood from her arm and examined under a microscope. Through it all, a serum seal. She didn't resist. She didn't try. She just laser ran at them though they wanted, her eyes fixed on the serum, her mind followed. While the measurements were complete, with more moved on to take out the strength assessments. They released her from the table and brought her to a corner of the room where a series of weights had been arranged, eardogs of increase of size, ranging from 10 bands to 500 bands. List each one, with more ordered. Start was the latest. As she lifted them one by one, she lifted the 3 with 0. When she reached the 500 band block, she lifted it too, held it above her head for a count of time before set it back down. What more the azure weight was exciting. Remarkable, I breathed. Absolutely remarkable. We needed to find her few words. We needed to find your limit. They never found it. Over the days and weeks that followed, Whitmore subjected the seat free to take out the phase. He had her lift increasingly heavy objects. He had her pull against restraints that measure the force she could curl. He had her run on a treadmill until she should have collapsed from exhaustion, except she never did. He brought another physicians, colleague Osher of his intestine racial science, and had her perform for them like a circus animal. And then there were the other experiments, the ones that drew blood. Whitmore wasn't counted to measure a sea strand from the sea. He wanted to understand its source. He wanted to see what was different about her own inside. So he cut her off. The first surgery was on October 15 1859. Whitmore made incision her left arm, brought the skin and muscle exposed to beneath. He examined it with his magnifying glass, took samples, meditated on in his notebook. Then he sewed her back up and was her heal. She healed faster than any patient he had ever seen. The one that should have took weeks to close was fully hidden for days. This only increased his obsession. More surgeries followed, her right arm, her left thigh, her back. Each time, with more deeper, took more samples, pushed the boundaries of what her body could endure. And each time, the sea surfaced. She healed. She crossed from weaker, not weaker. But the physical pain wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the humiliation, the dehumanization, being treated like a jack, a sinner, a submission to be studied and cataloged and discussed in clinical trials that stripped to every trace of her humanity. Whitmore held exhibitions. In fact, other physicians, professors, wealthy planters fancied themselves amateur scientists. They came to his basement laboratory, paid handsome fees for the privilege, and watched as she was forced to perform feats of strength while Whitmore lectured about her anomalous physiology. They debated whether her abilities were reflections of some primitive throwback or a mutation that might be bred into future generations of cells. They spoke about her as if she weren't there, as if she couldn't hear them, as if she didn't matter. But as she was there. She could hear them. And she remembered the free cynical world. She remembered the name of Dr. Theodore Simmons, a professor from the Medical College of South Carolina, who suggested that she should be bred with the strongest man cells to see if her abilities could be inherited. She remembered the name of James Crawford, a coat planter from Beaufort, offered Betsy $4 so he could use her as a work animal on his planters. She remembered the name of Senator Robert Elam, a state legislator who attended one of Whitmore's exhibitions and later wrote a letter praising the important scientific work being done that Bessem. She remembered all of their names, all of their faces, all of their words. She filled them away in her memory, building a catalog of every person who had participated in her torment, who had both from her suffering, who had treated her as something less than human. Someday she would use that catalog. Someday she would make them all better. But that day wasn't yet here. For now, she had survived. And survival meant more than just enduring the physical abuse. It meant keeping her mind intact. It meant finding something to hold on to when freeze was being stripped to. A fantasy that kept her sane during those dark months. The first was her memory the people who had left her. Aunt Bess, Uncle Peter, Ruby, her mother who she had never known but who lived in the stories others had told about her father who had called her his little princess before he was to come out. These memories were her anchor. They reminded her that she was a birth, not a submission. That she had been left, if she was not alone. The second son was her co-understander of Whitmore and his world. She wasn't educated as a traditional sense. She couldn't read or write. She had never been to school or studied books or learned the things that which children learned in their classrooms. But she was intelligent, deeply intelligent, with a quick mind and a short memory, and she was a birth. In the months she spent in Whitmore's basement, she learned more about her captor than he ever learned about her. She learned that Whitmore wasn't as respected as he pretended to be. The mainstream medical establishment viewed him as a fringe figure, a crank whose such was racial science, had led him away from legitimate practice. His exhibitions were attended by fellow travelers and curiosity seekers, not by the leader physician of the city. She learned that Whitmore was in financial trouble. His experiments were expensive, and his practice brought less and less money each year. He had borrowed high equipment in his lifestyle and his laboratory. He was desperate for a breakthrough that would restore his reputation and refill his coffers. She learned that Whitmore was involved in activities that went far beyond medical research. Late at night, when he thought she was asleep in her cage, she heard him meet Rothman opened his basement through a secret entrance. They spoke in hushed voices about shipments and routes and places beheld. They discussed the names of other traders, the locations of older planes, the breeds that had been built customs of ships and harbor masters. Whitmore was a slave trader, not just a bear and saddle of human beings, which was legal throughout the sea, but something more. He was involved in the legal importation of enslaved Africans, a practice that had been banned by federal law since 1988 but continued in secret, bringing thousands of people from Africa to American shores each year. This was a honor of offense. If Whitmore were caught, he would be tried and executed. And yet he continued, driven by greed and the certainty that he was above the law. She listened to these conversations and remembered the phrase. She memorized the names, dates, locations, the details of transactions that implicated some of the most powerful men as Carlene. She didn't know how she would use this information, but she knew it was valuable. She knew it was a web. And she was building an arsenal. The months passed. October became November became December. The year 1859 كافوت 1860. She marked the time by the rhythm of Whitmore's experiments, by the cycles of binary recovery that define her existence. But another change outside the walls of her breath. Since that would eventually change everything. November of 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected President of the United States. The news reached Charleston like a thunder clap. Lincoln was a Republican, a member of the party that opposed the expansion of the free to new territories. This folder says, his election was an existential threat. Within weeks, South Carolina became the first state seat from the Union. On December 20, 1860, the state legislature voted unanimously to leave the United States and form an independent republic. Sezernstets quickly followed. بفبراير 1861 ثبتت سيسيد informed Confederate States of America. War was coming. Everyone knew it. The quest was to whether it would have, but when. For see, these biblical developments or distant sender, barely audible source sequels of her underground. But she could sense the challenge in Whitmore's behavior. He was anxious, distracted, spenderless time on his experiments and more on his recruited activities. Then band the war was disrupted his business. Sibley lanes or uncertain. Braces were fallen. The future was unclear. And when the future is unclear, man make mistakes. On March 15 1861 Whitmore made his mistake. He had been directed that night, which was unusual for him. Whitmore was typically a controlled man, precise in his habits, disciplined in his thesis. The distress of recent months had worn him down. He came to the basement laboratory with a bottle of bourbon, a stack of papers, measured himself by dates and deadlines and days column. He watched remarked as he sat at his desk and spread the papers before him. There were financial records, job manifests, letters from his partners in the software. He studied them, made notes, cursed under his breath, and then he fell asleep. It happened gradually. As he had moved forward, his been separate from his fingers, his breathing dabbled into the tourism of unconsciousness. The bourbon had done its work. As he waited, she counted to 100, then 200, then 300. Whitmore did it stir. This was her chance. She had been tested the balls of her cage for months, bracing against the most gradually increasing force, careful effort bend them enough to be noticed. She knew exactly how much pressure they could withstand. She knew exactly how much force she needed to break them. She breathed. The iron groaned. She breathed harder. The metal began to bend. The sun seemed impossibly loud in the silent basement. As he froze, her eyes fixed on Whitmore's saber form. He shifted slightly, mumbled something unintelligible, and then settled back into sleep. She continued. Bore by bore, she bent the airway enough to slip through. It took her nearly an hour, more for an acneser and comets, to be reflected Whitmore showed initial working. Finally, the cab was wide enough. He ceased with the row, her body scrabbled against the bent metal, and stepped onto the cold stone floor of the laboratory. She was out of the cage. But she wasn't free yet. As he moved silently across the room, her bare feet making no sound on the stone. She approached Whitmore's desk and looked out at the papers spread before him. She couldn't read them. The letters and numbers meant nothing to her. But she had spent months listening to Whitmore discuss these documents with his partners. She had memorized the shapes of certain words, the formats of certain papers. She knew which ones were important. She gathered them all, the free paper on the desk, every document in the drawers. She found a leather satchel in the corner of the room and stuffed the freezer inside. Then she looked at Whitmore, asleep and helpless before her. She could kill him. It would be easy. A single blow to the head, delivered with the strength that made her so valuable to him. I wouldn't refer what cab. I wouldn't refer to anyone I can. But killing him would it be enough? This was too simple, too clean, too fine. Whitmore deserved worse than death. He deserved to see the freeze he had but clubs around him. He deserved to watch as the people he had rose up to destroy him. She found a knife on a nearby table, one of the surgical instruments that had been used to cut into her flesh so many times. She picked it up and walked back to where Whitmore sat slumped in his chair. She didn't kill him. Instead, she made a small cut on the back of his hand, just deep enough to draw blood. With that blood, she wrote a message on the wall above his desk. The words were crude, barely legible. She had never read before, but she had watched Whitmore read, and she had memorized the shapes of certain letters, certain words. It took her a long time, working carefully, for each letter was been stuck there. When she was finished, she stepped back and looked at her work. The message read, "You merged me." Na half as merger of you. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't eloquent. But it was enough. She took the satchel full of documents and left the laboratory. She climbed the stairs at the manor full of the house, more facility through the dark and hallways. She found a back door that led to the code and subsided into the cool March night. For the first time in almost 13 months, she was free. But she was itself. She was a fugitive now, a renounced slave in the heart of the Confederacy. If she were caught, she would be returned to it more, and the punishment she would face would be beyond the needs she had experienced before. She needed to disappear. She needed to become invisible. She needed to find allies who could help her survive and plan her next move. She made her way through the streets of tourists, through the shadows, avoid the gas lamps that illuminated the men's thoroughfares. She knew where she needed to go. She had heard what more the sisters talk about the steward-free blacks left, where no sometimes found shelter, where the authorities didn't look too closely. She found it as dawn was breaking. A neighborhood of small wood houses and narrow street tucked in a corner of the city that the will see what raised suburban to ignore. She knocked on doors until she found someone who loved to listen to her story. Her name was Elmoras Harriet Cole. She was a free black woman in her 60s who made her life as a seamstress and her mission to enslaved people escape to freedom. She listened to his story with a steady heart. "You escaped from what more?" Elmoras Cole said when she had finished. "Lord have mercy. I've heard stories about that man. Terrible stories. You're lucky to be alive, child." "I'm not lucky," she said. "I'm strong. And I'm not done yet." She opened the satchel and showed Elmoras the documents she had took. "I don't know what all these papers say," she admitted. "But I know they're important. I heard what more talk about them. Names of people who be themselves likely. Dates and places of shipments from Africa. Evidence that could cement the gallows." Elmoras looked at the papers with grown astonishment. "Child, do you know what you have here? This could run down some of the most powerful men in Caroline." "I know," she said. "That's what I want." Elmoras was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "All right. I know people who can help, people in the north who can make sure these papers get into the right hands. But it's going to take time. And your corner needs to head. What more will be looking for you? Every self catcher in the state will be looking for you. I can't stay ahead," she said. "I've been hidden my whole life. And so began the next phase of his journey." She stayed with Elmoras Cole for several weeks, learned to read with a stack of effort, studied the documents she had stolen, understood for the first time the full scope of Whitmore's crimes. She learned names and connections she hadn't known before. She learned that the conspiracy was larger than she had imagined, reaching into the history rifles of South Carolina City. In April of 1861, they were finally calm. Confederate forces that fought Sumter in Charles Harbor, and the bloodiest conflict in American history began. The country was torn apart, and in the chaos, no opportunities emerged. Elmoras Cole's contacts in the north began to move the documents through secret channels. The information was passed from hand to hand, making it so to abolitionists and journalists and federal officials who would know what to do with it. But she wasn't content to it for others that. She had spent 18 months as a prisoner, 18 months as a citizen, 18 months being studied and measured and cowed. She had promised herself that she would make them better. And now she was ready to keep that promise. She began to move through the plantations around Charleston, traveling at night, using the sirens that had once been her crest as a tool of leverage. She found the slave people who need help escaping. She broke chains with her bare hands. She tore doors off their hinges. She carried children who were too tired to walk. She became a legend of the enslaved population. A whispered story about a girl who was stronger than any man, or a bird of the doctrines to set people free. The Coder's Shadow. By summer of 1861, the Shadow had helped more than 14 enslaved people escape Union lands. She had disrupted operations at Ada's plantations, cost their owners thousands of dollars lost property and damaged infrastructure. She had become one of the most wanted fugitives in South Carolina. And she was disconcerted. The documents she had stolen from Whitmore began to have their effect in the fall of 1861. Stories build the northern newspapers but like after adventures. Names are named. After this was presented. Their respectable man who had attended Whitmore's exhibitions, who had discussed with the livestock, who had boasted from the legal importage of young beginners, found their reputations under attack. Some of them denied a freeze. Some of them fled to their states or other countries. Some of them found themselves as criminal charges that would haunt them for years. Dr. Theodore Simmons, the professor who had suggested reader Lassie, was dismissed from the Medical College of South Carolina amid scandal and disgrace. James Crawford, the planter who had wanted to use her as a work animal, lost half his fortune. His legal trade activities were exposed and his credit was destroyed. Senator Robert Lim was forced to withdraw from public life when Attersbury's Whitmore's scientific work were published in newspapers across the country. One by one, the men who had participated in his torment found themselves as the consequences of their actions. Not all of them were brought to justice. Many escaped punishment entirely, protected by their wealth as their connections. But their names were known. Their crimes were documented. The measure that Lassie had taken of them was being used against them. And through it all, Whitmore himself remained at large. His reputation was damaged. His business was disrupted. But he hadn't been captured. He hadn't been tried. He had to pay the full price for what he had done. Lassie knew that her work wasn't finished. She knew that sooner or later she would have to face Whitmore again. She knew that the final reckoning was still to come. But that reckoning would have to wait. The war was intensifying. The Union Army was pushed deeper into Confederate territory. No opportunities were emerging for the enslaved people throughout the South. Lassie threw herself into the work of liberation, using her strength and her knowledge to help as many people as possible escape freedom. She was 17 years old when she escaped from Whitmore's besom. By the time the war ended 4 years later, she would be 21. And in those 4 years, she would become one of the most effective and field liberators the South had ever seen. But that is a story for another time. The summer of 1861 was the best summer South Carolina had ever seen, and it was only the beginning. The war between the Union and the Confederacy was spread across the country like a wildfire, consuming a freezer bath. Battles were being fought in Virginia, in Missouri, in the waters of the coast. Young men were dying by the thousands, and everyone knew that the worst was yet to come. For Lassie, the war wasn't a stretch. It was an opportunity. She had spent the months since her escape building a network of contacts throughout the low country South Carolina. Free black people who had it free. Enslaved people who were willing to risk freedom for freedom. White abolitionists who had come south before the war and found themselves trapped behind enemy lines. If a few Confederate deserters who had seen enough of the war to know that the cause they were fighting for was the tourist therefore. These people became her prisoners. They told her which plantations were vulnerable, which overseers were cruel, which enslaved people were ready to run. The perfidied savages were known as could head door of the day, and routes that could be traveled at any. They created a web of resistance that stretched from tourist to the Georgia border, invisible to the Confederate authorities, but harmless activity. And at the center of that web was the Shadow. The stories about her crew with each basement. Some said she could lift a horse over her head. Some said she had installed all air kit with her bare hands. Some said she couldn't be killed, that bullets bounced off her skin, that she had been decoded or the floors the spirits of her ancestors. The stories were exaggerated, of course. Essie was strong, but she wasn't insensible. She bled when she was cat. She fell to burn when she was 8. She was a yom, like everyone else. But she understood the power of legend. She understood that fear could be a web as effective as any rifle. So she let the stories spread. She even read them, leave scenes of her praises at the plantations she had read, breaker sinners that should have been breakable, donor sinners that seemed impossible. These left odors of Saskarlen were terrified. They had extra courage. They reinforced their locks. They kept their enslaved people under constant surveillance. But none of it mattered. The shadow knew, appeared as the dorgans, disappeared before anyone could stop her. By the end of 1861, Bessie had helped more than 100 enslaved people escape. Some of them had their white lanes and eventually freed in the north. Others joined the Chroma communities of Renoise, hidden in the swamps and forests of the low country, survive off the land and waited for the dawn the unit army would rift liberate them all. But these activities had come not to basic Confederate sorties. They knew someone was organizer the scabs, someone with unusual abilities and extensive knowledge of the age. They didn't know who she was or where she came from, but they were determined to find out. In January of 1862, the Confederate military commander in chief issued a reward for the capture of the individual known as the Shadow. A reward of $500 was offered for information leader terrorist. Slave bit was increased throughout the low country. Every black birth, free or enslaved, was viewed with suspicion. The crackdown made disease work more dangerous, but it didn't stop her. She simply became more careful, more cunning, more ruthless. She changed her routes. She varied her patterns. She trusted fewer people with information about her movements. She became a cost, impossible to predict, impossible to catch. And she continued to wait for news of Silas with more. The doctor had disabled after his escape. His mansion on Mitra Street had been closed up, his laboratory abandoned. Some said he had fled to Europe to escape the scandal caused by the leaked documents. Others said he had gone to Richmond, the new capital of the Confederacy, to offer his services to the rebel firm. No one knew for sure where he was or what he was doing. But she knew he was still alive. She could feel it in her bones, a certainty that went beyond reason. Their story wasn't finished. Sooner or later, they would meet again. That meeting came sooner than she expected. In March of 1862, he received word from one of her contacts in Church. The old Silas Whitmore had returned to the city. He wasn't practicing medicine anymore. He wasn't conducting experiments. He was working for the Confederate Army, using his knowledge of this after to help the government acquire labor for military construction projects. The Confederacy needed orders to build fortifications, dig trenches, maintain supply lanes. Free labor was expensive and hard to find. Enslaved labor was abundant and cost nothing beyond the expense of keeping reserves alive. Whitmore had become a broker, connecting plantation owners with military contracts, taking a percentage of every transaction. He was making more money than ever. And he was doing it on the backs of enslaved people, just as he always had. When he heard this news, something shifted inside her. The patient, methodical approach she had adopted since her escape with something hotter, something more urgent. She had spent a year with it, plan, building her network. Now it was time to act. She began to gather intelligence on Whitmore's no brush. She learned that he had set up an office in a warehouse near the tourist docks where enslaved workers were processed before being sent into military construction sites. She learned that he had hired a small army of coded to protect himself, men who were bad will ask no questions and show no mercy. She learned that he kept detailed records of every transaction, records that would be damaged if they fell into their own hands. She was solar in Samasres. Samasres that made her blood run cold. Whitmore was looking for her. He hadn't forgotten what she had done to him. He hadn't forgotten the documents she had stolen, the message she had written on his wall, the humiliation she had caused him. He was offered a personal reward of $1 for her capture, separate from the official Confederate bounty. He wanted her back. He wanted to finish what he had started. When I see her this, she smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. Could, she said to Morris to call, or had wrote her the nose. Let him look. Let him spend his money and his time hunter for me. It'll make it easy when I come for him. Morris to call looked at her with worried eyes. Child, you need to be careful. This man is dangerous. He has resources, connections. If he finds you, he won't find me, as he said. He'll find him first. She began to plan her attack. It took her 3 months to prepare. She gathered information, recruited allies, scattered locations, met escabrots. She studied Whitmore's habits, learned his schedule, identified the weaknesses in his security. She was patient, methodical, thorough. She would have one chance to bring him down. She couldn't afford to fail. On the night of June 15 1862 Essie made her move. The warehouse where Whitmore conducted his business was a large brick building on the waterfront, surrounded by a half-stopped to serious bakes. On calls patrolled the perimeter at all hours. The only interest was a heavy wood cat that was kept locked and washed. Essie didn't go through the cat. She approached the warehouse from the water side, some through the dark harbor until she reached the pillars that supported the building's foundation. She claimed that the pillars hand over hand, her extraordinary strength made this easy. She found a loose board in the floor above and braided it up, sabering to the warehouse through a barely wide enough for a normal berth. The interior of the warehouse was dark and cavernous. Great sand barrels were stacked along the walls. In the center of the space was an obelisk where enslaved people were held before being transported to their work assignments. It was an empty net, the orders have been moved at the rear that day. Essie moved the rosy shadows, her bare feet sailed on the wood floor. She could hear voices coming from a room at the back of the warehouse. Whitmore's office. She told it, standing low, using the stack cork as cover. The door to the office was open a crack. Lamplights built through the cab, casting a thin squad across the floor. Essie braced herself against the wall and listened. She could hear Whitmore's face, that cold, precise face that had haunted her dreams for more than 2 years. He was talking with someone, discussing numbers, braces, delivery schedules. Business as usual. The business of human suffering. There are many 300 more workers by the end of the month, Whitmore was saying. I've already secured commitments from planters Beaufort and Georgetown. We should be able to meet the quote with room to spare. And the payment another face asked. $40 per head per month. Same as before. The planters are happy to enter themselves for that price. It's a pure profit for them. And we take our cut off the top. Essie felt her hands clench into fists. $40 a head. That was what a human life was worth this month. $40 a month, built someone who had never done a day's work in their life, while the actual workers labored and suffered and died. She had heard enough. Essie pushed open the door and stepped into the office. Whitmore was sitting behind a large wood desk, paper spread before him, a pen in his hand. Across from him sat a Confederate officer in a gray uniform, a major by his insignia. Both men looked up when the door opened, their expressions shifted from surprise to confused fear as they recognized who had just walked in. You, Whitmore breathed. His eyes had come hell. His hand trembled as he said oh his bill. Me, as he said. Her face was calm, steady. Did you miss me, doctor? The Confederate officer reached for the pistol at his belt. He affirmed it. Essie caused the Roman three-cook threads and grabbed his wrist, squeezing until she felt the bones strain together. The officer cried at him and dropped the weapon. Essie picked it up and tucked it into her waistband. Don't, she said to Whitmore, who had started to rise from his chair. Sit down. We're going to have a conversation. Whitmore sat. His face was a mask of barely controlled terror. The cowardice, he said. The lil have heard? Your causes or bziretna, he said. I have friends that said or keeper them okebid. We won't be disturbed. She walked around the desk until she was standing directly in front of Whitmore, close enough to touch him. He flinched back in his chair, bracing himself into the leather as if he could somehow escape through it. Do you remember what you did to me? He asked quietly. Do you remember the Kaddish? The Kfibarametis? The surgeries? Whitmore's mess opened and closed. No sound came out. I remember the freeze, he continued. A free cat. A free measurement. A free time you thought about me like I was an animal, a sin, a submissive beast. I remember the people you unfitted to touch. I remember their names. I remember what they said. She leaned closer, her face inches from his. I remember you telling them that you wanted to find out what made me strong. You wanted to understand the source of my power. You kept me open trained to find it. She reached out and grabbed the front of his shirt, lifted him out of his chair with one hand. Whitmore danced in the air, his feet kicking helplessly, his fist red as the collar tightened around his throat. Do you want to know the source of my strength, Doctor? Do you want to understand it? She brought him close, so close that their noses were almost touching. It comes from a free one you ever had. A free one you ever sold. A free one you ever cut open studied and so like garbage. Their strength flows through me. Their burn fuels me. And there is nothing in your science, nothing in your books, nothing in your code, that can measure that. She threw him across the room. He hit the wall hard and crumbled to the floor, gasping for breath. The Confederate officer had been watchful of this with eyes. He hadn't moved since he took his gun. Now he raised his hands in surrender. Please, he said. I'm just a soldier. I was just following orders. I don't. I know exactly what you are, he said. You're a man who broke from slavery, same as him. Using a uniform makes you different. It doesn't. You're all the same. She turned back to Whitmore, who was slowly pulling himself back into the wall. I'm not going to kill you, she said. I thought about it for 2 years. I thought about how could it would feel it break your neck with my bare hands. But that would be too easy. That would let you escape. She went to his desk and covered the papers that were spread across it, financial records, shop manifests, letters from military officials and pensioners, a fit of corruption like electricity that reached into the high surface of the Confederacy. Instead, I'm going to destroy you, she said. I'm going to take these papers and give them to people who will make sure the whole world knows what you've done. Not just this last raid. Not just the experiments. A free son. A free crime. A free secret. A free deal you affirmed. She stuffed the papers into a satchel she had brought with her. Your name is going to become a curse. People will spit when they say it. Your family will be shamed not to know you. And you're going to live long enough to see to have. That's your punishment. That's your sentence. Whitmore had managed to get to his feet, leaning against the wall for support. There was blood on his lip where he had bit during the fall. His eyes were wild, desperate. You can't do this, he said. You're just a slave. You're nothing. You're property. He walked toward the door. Then she sobbed and turned back. I was never property, she said. I was never nothing. You just couldn't see it because you were too blind, too stupid, too confused of your own superiority to recognize the home being standing right in front of you. She opened the door. Could be, Doctor. I hope you live a very long time. She walked at the off and disappeared into the darkness of the warehouse. Behind her, she could hear Whitmore scream for his cowards, scream for help, scream threats and promises and pleas. But no one came. realized said hadden their work well. These teams called finally responded, she was long gone. She had slipped back into the harbor, swum a waterboat, and vanished into the sea. The berbers she had took would be on their way to lanes within the week. The disruption serious what more had become. Over the months that followed, the documents she had stolen at their way through the net of fablishionist and sympathizers that stretched from the south to the north. Their work copied, analyzed, and disseminated to newspapers, government officials, and military commanders. Their flashes orders stated. What more the record showed that he had been involved in the legal reportage of the South Africans for more than 15 years. They showed that he had bribed customs officials, harbor masters, and law enforcement officers to look the other way. They showed that he had connections with some of the most prominent families in South Carolina, people who had publicly denounced the legal slave trade while secretly profited from it. The record also revealed the extent of Whitmore's medical experiments. Detailed notes describe the procedures he had performed on dozens of enslaved people over the years, names, dates, outcomes. People who had been cut up, studied, and sold like laboratory specimens. People who had died in acne so that Whitmore could satisfy his twisted curiosity about racial differences. When these revelations became public, the reaction was so severe. In the North, abolitionists hailed Whitmore's records as proof of the horrors of slavery. Newspapers published excerpts from his notes, describing his experiments in graphic detail. Politicians cited his activities as justification for the war, arguing that the Confederacy was a common enterprise that needed to be destroyed. In the South, the response was more complicated. Some Confederate leaders tried to distance themselves from Whitmore, claiming that his activities were racist and didn't represent the character of the slaveholder class. Others defended him, arguing that his work was legitimate scientific research that had been misrepresented by no other propagandists. But the damage was done. Whitmore's reputation was destroyed. His business collapsed. His allies abandoned him. The Confederate government, embarrassed by the scandal, stripped him of his military contacts and brought him from work to the army. By the end of 1862, Silas Whitmore was a ruined man. He had lost his wealth, his position, his standard in society. He was a prey, shunned by everyone who had unscouted his forever. He retreated to his mansion Mitre Street and early emerged, hiding from the world he had once dominated. But he wasn't finished with him yet. The war continued through 1863 and into 1864. Union forces stated their grip on the Confederacy, capture key cities and suffer surveillance. In South Carolina, federal troops had established a foothold on the sea lands of the coast, liberated thousands of enslaved people and established communities of freed people who were to the land for themselves. As he became part of this effort, she worked with unique commanders, provided intelligence about Confederate positions and helped guide reporters through territory she knew better than anyone. Her knowledge of the low country was infallible, and her reputation as the shadow opened doors that would have been closed to anyone else. She also continued her work liberate enslaved people from plantations throughout the region. With Union support, she was able to operate more openly, lead large groups of renounced safety rather than move in small numbers in their cover of doctrines. By the end of 1864, she had helped more than 500 people escape freedom. The men who had participated in her torture at Whitmore's exhibition continued to face consequences. Dr. Theodore Simmons, the professor who had suggested reading her, was arrested by Union forces when they captured tourists and was charged with crimes against humanity. He died in federal custody before he could be tried, a broken disgraced man. James Crawford, the planter who had wanted to use her as a work animal, lost a freeze when Union troops burned his plantation to the ground. He fled to Texas and was never heard from again. Senator Robert Lamb, the politician who had praised Whitmore's work, was captured by Union soldiers in 1865 and spent the rest of the war in a prison camp in New York. After the war, he was bought from holder public oath and died surety in 1871. One by one, the men who had participated the price for their crimes. no toll of them fast justice. Some scattered, protected by the rules or their connections or some lack. But enough of them felt that as if it crime satisfaction. The merger she had take of them was being used against them. The ledger was being balanced. And then comes the end of the war. Untold 19 1865 General Robert Lee surrendered the General Ulysses Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. The Confederacy was defeated. Slavery was abolished. Formerly people were free. When news of the surrender reached South Carolina, the sea was with a group of freed people on one of the sea islands. They gathered on the beach and watched the sunset over the water, sun summers of berries and Thanksgiving. They had surfaced. They had won. The nightmare was finally over. But for the sea, there was one more task complete. One more كانت سرت. On April 18 1865 Union forces entered Chores. The city that had been the cradle of the South, the heart of the Confederacy, followed that defeat. Confederate soldiers had already fled, leaving behind a population of civilians and freed people to create the conquer army. Essie was one of the first to enter the city. She would through streets she had once trafficked the fear, past buildings where she had had from self-patrols, through neighborhoods where she had helped slave people escape freedom. The city was different now. The old order was crumbling. A new world was being born. She made her way to meet her straight, to the mansion where she had been held prisoner, where she had been tortured and studied and treated like an animal. The building was still standing, but it showed signs of neglect. When the door broke, the cold was overgrown. The paint was peeling from the walls. She opened the front door and pushed out. It wasn't locked. Inside, the mansion was dark and sealed. Desk covered the three surfaces. The furniture was shrouded with white sheets. The paintings on the walls had been removed, leaving rectangular patches of later wallpaper where they had hung. As she moved through the house, her footsteps echoed in the empty rooms. She descended the stairs to the basement, then to the sub-basement of her life. The heavy wood door was still there, reinforced with wire bands. It stood open. She walked into the laboratory. It was exactly as she remembered it. The shelves of drawers and instruments. The table with its shackles. The row of cages along the wall. A freezer was covered with dust, but nothing had been moved. It was like stepping into a tomb. And there, sitting in a chair in the corner of the room, was Dewar Silas Whitmore. He was older than she remembered. His hair had gone completely white. His ass was gaunt, his cheeks hollow, his eyes sunken. He was dressed in a stained shirt and trousers that hung loosely on his wasted form. He looked like a man who had been slowly dying for years. He looked up when she entered. For a moment, there was no recognition in his eyes. Then he saw her face, and something reflected life in those dead days. Something like fear. You come, he said. His face was a whisper, barely audible. I know you would. I've been wet. He stood in the doorway, looking at the man who had caused her so much suffering. She had imagined this moment many times. She had rehearsed what she would say, what she would do. She had dreamed of breaking him, of making him feel a fraction of the pain he had inflicted on her in so many years. But now that she was here, she felt nothing. No rage, no hatred, no deep satisfaction. Just a profound emptiness, like staring into a hole where something had also been. Why did you stay, she asked. You could have fled. Everyone else did. Whitmore laughed, a hollow sound that echoed the empty laboratory. Where would I go? My money is gone. My reputation is destroyed. No one will help me. No one will evict me. I have nothing left. He just stared weakly at his room around them. This is all I have. This laboratory. These instruments. The work I did here. It's the only thing that formatted me. They only son that made me feel alive. I looked at SEO Samsung like curiosity. I thought about you every day since you scared. I've wondered how you did it, how you bent those bowers, how you survived. I thought I understood what you were, but I was wrong. I never understood Anissa. SEO Xoli told him. She sobbed a few feet away, close enough to touch him, close enough to kill him with a sin kelbo. You wanted to know where my strengths come from, she said. You kept me open trail to find it. You studied me like I was a citizen. But you never found Anissa, did you? Because you were looking in the wrong place. She crashed though so that she was at a level with him. My strength doesn't come from my muscles or my bones or my blood. It comes from her. She blessed her hand over her heart. It comes from everyone who ever left me. My mother, who did bring me into the soul. My father, who was ripped away from me when I was 3 years old. The people who raised me and protected me and taught me how to survive. The people I've helped escape to freedom. The people who believed in me when I had nothing left to believe in. She stood up. That's what you could never understand. That's what all your CS and all your experiments could never measure. We're not enemies. We're not citizens. We're human beings. And the strength that comes from that, from love and hope and the refusal to be broke, is greater than any you can imagine. Whitmore stared at her for a long moment. Then he bowed his head. I know, he said quietly. I know that now. I've had a long time to think about it. About what I did. About who I was. About the monster I became. He looked up at her again. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I'm not asking for mercy. I know what I deserve. I'm just asking you to understand that I know. I finally understand. SEO said it. She had expected this. She had expected the face or fear or deny. Not this quick acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Not this broken confession from a broken man. It doesn't change anything, she said faintly. It doesn't bring back the people you killed. It doesn't heal the wounds you inflicted. It doesn't undo the suffering you caused. I know, Whitmore said. Nothing can change that. Nothing can make it right. I just wanted you to know, before then, that I understand. That I see what I was. That I'm sorry. She looked at him for a long time. She thought about the reason he had done, not just her, but the reason of other people. She thought about the life they had destroyed, the families he had torn apart, the burden he had inflicted in the name of sins. She thought about what he deserved. And then she made her decision. I'm not going to kill you, she said. I could. It would be easy. But that would make me like you. It would make me a monster. And I refused to be a monster. She turned toward the door. The only army is in this tea. They'll be looking for workmen, men who participated those teas. Man like you. In corner to tell them where to find you. What happens after that is up to them. She bowed at the doorway and looked back at them. I hope you live a very long time, doctor. I hope you have years and years to think about what you did. I hope you remember the faces of everyone you had. I hope they'll haunt you until the day you die. She walked out of the laboratory and did look back. 3 days later, Union soldiers arrested Silas Whitmore at his mansion on Mitre Street. He was charged with crimes against humanity and transported to a federal prison New York Poetry. هنا فرماد تذكرت روم. أونوكست 12 TH 1865 he was found dead in his cell. The official cause of death was hot failure. But those who saw the body said he looked like a man who had simply sobbed to enter life. When she held the nose, she felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief, just the same emptiness she had felt when she confronted him in his laboratory. It was over. The monster was dead. But the world he had helped create was still there, still broke, still in need of healing. She turned her attention to that work. In the years following the war, she became a leader in the community of freed people in South Carolina. She helped establish stores where former slaves could earn trade and aid. She organized workers' demand for wages and decent conditions. She advocated for the biblical rights of black status during the 3 years of Reconstruction. She also continued fighting against the men who tried to restore the road order. When the Ku Klux Klan emerged in South Carolina, to raise the black communities and murder those who dared to their rights, she was one of the first to stand against them. She used her strength and her reputation to protect the vulnerable, to confront the field, to make it clear that the freed people of South Carolina would not be intimidated. The stories about her continue to grow. People said she had once fought off a Desert Clan's mechanical hand. They said she had torn down a burned cross with her bare hands. They said she had faced down all mobs with adventure. Some of these stories were true. Some were exaggerated. But all of them served a purpose. They reminded people that they were not powerless. That they could fight back. That strength came from community, from solidarity, from the refusal to be broke. In 1877, she married a man named Daniel Frame, a former soldier in the United States troops who had fought at the Battle of Honey Hill and the Siege of Charleston. Together, they had 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. She named her first daughter Kaur, after the mother she had never known. She told her children the stories of her life, the plantation where she was born, the strengths that had made her different, the doctor who had tried to break her, the years she had spent fighting for freedom. She told them so that they would understand where they come from, so that they would know what their mother had survived, so that they would carry her strengths with them into the future. The years of Reconstruction quite the years of redemption, as which Southerners reclaimed political power and began the long process of struggle with the rights that black people had won. Jim Crow laws were passed. Segregation was enforced. The promise of freedom was betrayed and can be a nation that could turn itself straight to its citizens as equals. She watched these developments with sorrow, but not surprise. She had never believed that freedom would come easily. She had never expected that the victory of the war would be the end of the struggle. She knew that the fight for justice wasn't a cynical battle, but a long campaign, one that would continue for generations. She did what she could. She organized. She advocated. She refused to be silent. And when she could no longer fight, she passed the torch to her children and her grandchildren, trusting them to continue the work she had begun. She did on September 18, 1912, exactly 53 years after the day she had lifted a whack of a top horse and changed her life forever. She was 70 years old. She was surrounded by her family, 3 generations of free people who owed their existence to a crew who had refused to be measured, studied, or broke. Her last words, recorded her granddaughter, were, "The strength is you. Never forget. And they never did." The story of the Frame was passed down through her family for generations. It was told at kitchens and church gatherings, at family reunions and memorial services. It was a story of suffering and survival, of cruelty and resistance, of the doctrines that human beings can inflict on one another and the light that can survive even the deepest doctrines. It was also a story that the official history tried to forget. The men who had participated in Whitmore's experiments, the institutions that had sanctioned his work, the systems that had made his craze possible, none of them wanted to remember what they had done. They believed they did this. They destroyed the records. They told themselves that it had never happened, or that it had been as bad as people said, or that it had been necessary for the advancement of science. But the truth has a way of survival. It lives in the memories of those who experienced it. It echoes in the stories that are passed from generation to generation. It waits patiently for the day when someone will find us. This is the story. The story of a girl who was born into slavery, who was blessed and cursed with extraordinary strength, who was sold to a monster and subjected to horrors that no human being should ever have to endure. The story of how she escaped, how she fought back, how she brought those men who had tried to destroy her. The story of how she lived her life as a free woman, raised a family, building a community, fighting for justice until the day she died. It is a story about the darkness of the human heart, the capacity for cruelty that exists in all of us. But it is also a story about Samusarus. Samusarus stronger than cruelty. Samusarus that can't be measured or studied or explained by science. The strength that comes from love. The power that comes from community. The resilience that comes from refusal, absolutely and unconditionally, to be broke. As Ephraim had that strength. She carried it with her from the plantage where she was born to the laboratory where she was tortured to the battlefields of the civil war to the communities she helped in the years that followed. She passed on to her children and her grandchildren with the generations that come after. And it is still there today, in every one who fights for justice, who stands against a brush, or refuses to accept that the way sinners are as the way sinners have to be. The shadow is gone, but her strength remains. It lives through history like in the grand affair, invisible but unstoppable, waiting for the moment so it is needed most. This rather says the legacy. Not the scores on her hand or the stories in the newspapers or the documents that brought her tormentors. Her legacy is the strength itself. The unbreakable sin that lays in the hearts of all who refuse to be measured, studied, or defined by the people who would destroy them. The strength that can't be explained. The power that can't be contained. The light that burns in the darkness, no matter how deep.